Welcome back to Good Revenue. I'm your host, Neetha Bidway. Today, we're going to talk about tariffs backfiring, AI agents stumbling, Walmart in stealth mode, and finally, we will talk about the long, slow demise of the media. Thanks for joining us. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the feed. You'll find links to everything we talk about in the show notes. First up, tariffs really are a tax on everyone. We wanted to build on some of the episodes we've talked about before. Let's start by talking about your money and specifically where it's going. Toyota just announced a $200 per vehicle hike starting in July. So Insurify warned in May that car prices were expected to rise by 9% this year, and they also expect a 15% increase in insurance costs. And the insurance rationale is interesting. Insurance companies are planning to raise prices because the cost of replacement parts is expected to increase so substantially due to the tariffs. The 2025 tariffs are going to hit clothing and textiles particularly hard as well. The Yale Budget Lab sees a 33% increase in shoe prices in the short run and a 28% increase in apparel prices too. Those are both in the short run. Over the longer term, they're expecting 8% and 15% across those two categories respectively. Meanwhile, China is having a really interesting reaction to the ongoing trade war with the United States, which you may remember from our conversation last week is currently in a pause while we discuss the outlines of a framework. China has a $500 billion trade surplus, and it is reshaping global markets. Because they've been shut out of the United States due to tariffs and this ongoing pause in trade talks, Chinese factories are dumping goods elsewhere, according to the New York Times. Southeast Asia and Europe in particular are seeing a flood of Chinese goods, and this is causing real domestic challenges in a host of countries. The question is that countries now have to choose. Do they want protectionist measures or cheap exports? Because the overload of goods is really bad for domestic production in any market. That includes the United States. Consumers aren't the only people facing some of the trouble when it comes to the tariff tax, which, as a reminder, is the highest level of tariffs that we've seen in the United States since 1936. That's also from the Yale Budget Lab. Venture capital is also continuing to struggle. We've talked quite a bit about zombie unicorns this year. And according to PitchBook, that status of unicorns, meaning companies that are unable to go public or to have meaningful exits due to high valuations and the high cost of borrowing, those firms are weighing down on venture capital. And the result is that a lot of VCs are not hiring as much. And if you're a junior or a younger member of staff, you're very likely being shown the door soon, as these businesses are just not as profitable as they were once hoped to be. On the flip side, the firms in VC that seem to actually be doing well are the bigger ones. Speaking of the bigs, tech companies promised AI agents would transform business. So we wanted to check in to see how that's going. As it turns out, AI agents are a little bit behind schedule. Salesforce AI Research tested leading AI agents that they have built. They've been huge advocates in what they call the agentic space. They tested these AI agents on real business tasks. Let's just do one thing before we get into it. Let's just talk about what an AI agent is. AI agents should be able to perform discrete tasks. They should be able to achieve goals autonomously, and they're also supposed to be able to learn and adapt over time. Those are some of the criteria. And again, some people might quibble with those definitions, but that's generally the consensus in what I've seen. What Salesforce has found, which is really interesting, is also going to be pretty uncomfortable for some folks. Here's the data. They noted that workflow execution topped about 83% success, so not 100%, but pretty good. But that only applied to simple tasks. When it came to a single turn request, the success rate was just 58%. When it got to things like database queries or textual reasoning or policy compliance, the rate dropped all the way to 35%. So that's not great, and one assumes that they are doing a lot of work to try to recover and improve that efficacy. The worst thing that they found, and this one I found really troubling too, is that confidentiality awareness was non-existent nearly in their research. And what this means is that when they tried to train the agents to make them more aware of what is confidential, performance actually worsened. I have to believe there are a lot of general counsels out there that are probably breathing into a paper bag, because that's just not the kind of liability and risk that one would want to assume, especially if you're a large public customer trying to use a Salesforce agent. Some other news in the world of toxicity: OpenAI researchers discovered something pretty troubling too. They recently released a paper, and it's all about some of the considerations around public AI systems. Their paper identified what they call a toxic persona feature. And while it predicts dangerous AI behavior, and that's probably a good thing, here are some of the findings which I think are super concerning. The first is something called emergent misalignment. So what they found is that fine-tuning LLMs on bad data actually causes problems like incorrect data and malicious data. So there could be a small amount of bad data and it's sending the LLMs astray. This is actually leading to really harmful responses, unethical responses, illegal responses in unrelated domains, which is the thing that I find to be wild and super concerning. So they're saying in a data set, there may be a tiny amount of bad data, and somehow that bad data is making the AI behave in a way that its builders did not intend. And whatever that bad activity is, it's applying to other areas. So you can see how that would really bring you into the land of unintended consequences if that was allowed to persist. The paper found some specific patterns. Some of the detectable patterns inside the AI model included things like a toxic persona. So when it was active, the model behaves badly. And the worst part of this is these are unintended traits. These are things that the model builders did not intend. And these patterns aren't random. OpenAI actually says that they can be identified and potentially controlled, but not definitively so. So it's a good thing, I think, that the researchers are rigorous in their work and that they publish all of this publicly. That's a really good thing. I think all of us, just as consumers, bystanders, maybe even as investors or fellow builders, like, we want that information. It is helpful. But it also raises the question, I think, too, of what are our obligations and responsibilities as a society? Is this the world that we want to live in, or is there something here that maybe we want to address? And I think about this because we talked a couple episodes ago about an effort in Congress to potentially ban all regulation of AI. And the more that we talk about all the different studies that have come out in just this year, and we talk about the volume and scope of these unintended consequences, I just really feel like a 10-year pause on any sort of oversight funded by taxpayers is very likely going to end up in a Trail of Tears situation, like a Terminator Trail of Tears situation. One of my favorite movies. That is just not the reality that I want to live in. And as much as I enjoy a good Sam Worthington outing, I know I'm the minority vote on that movie, but I did think Terminator Salvation was great, just for the record. I just don't think that's a world I want to live in the near future, or really in the distant future. So there is something here that when I put these findings together, and I also think about the things we've discussed, like the malicious AI swarms that can be manipulated by bad actors, feels like we're in a level of risk that is pretty concerning to me. Might be to you too. Next, let's talk about manifest destiny. So, well, we have a lot of stories here that I think bring a critical eye to the world of artificial intelligence. Sometimes we see really good news stories too, and we want to be able to share them. So public data sets aren't for everyone. And there's a great example out there of what might happen if you decide to take control if you're a builder. Walmart built a proprietary AI tool for its 1.5 million US store associates. It's the largest employer in the country and has been for a long time. And their goals were, understandably, to keep their own data private, to improve accuracy, and to cut costs. I think that's such a solid set of goals, because one can imagine that any company at any size or scale is very likely feeling something similar. So I think it's a good test case. And the results are pretty interesting. They had 3 million daily queries that their AI processes, which is tremendous volume. And they found some performance improvements like 67% faster task planning, improved multilingual communication. They're able to provide step-by-step guidance on complex processes. And they're also able to stock faster using a combination of augmented reality and RFID, which is pretty cool. Even if you're not in logistics, I think you can appreciate the hundreds of millions of products that Walmart has to manage, plus their supply chains and the logistics of all of that. And the idea that they have found great success building their own AI and combining it with prior technology like RFID and whatever's going on with augmented reality is pretty interesting. The other thing that's interesting is that what they have built can plug into other LLMs, but from all the publicly reported information that I saw, they are doing something that it seems to be private. It isn't reliant on any of these big public models. So given that major customers of large tech companies are very likely keeping a close eye on all of this, I think it's a really interesting question to see whether companies are going to follow in Walmart's footsteps and kind of go it alone and try to figure this out, especially if they're quite large, which I think is likely if you're a JP Morgan or some other massive firm, particularly in the United States. And in that case, the real question is, again, what happens to those business models for all of the $400 billion that has been invested across major tech firms into AI systems? So we'll continue to report on this one. We never get tired of it. Two other quick notes on AI, since this is a segment that we seem to talk about all the time here. First of all, Anthropic actually had a legal win this week. This is a copyright case involving Claude, which is their AI chatbot, effectively, that they introduced 2 years ago. And the judge found that training on AI on legally purchased books is fair use. They do face a separate trial when it comes to the millions of books that they ingested that were pirated. So this is a really interesting question. We've had a few different cases, including the Disney Universal versus Midjourney AI case from last week. And there were also the Thomson Reuters case against a Westlaw competitor from back in February that we talked about, if you want to look back at some of the other cases. So again, I'm not a lawyer or a legal expert, but it seems pretty clear that there's going to be some further appeals. And I'm going to go out on a limb there and assume that the Supreme Court will have to weigh in on all of this soon. So maybe we'll bring in a legal expert at some point to talk about that, because I think this is law happening in real life and with huge business and potentially personal consequences. So super interesting. Okay, and our last segment. This is a big topic, but it's a question I wonder about all the time, which is, who do you trust online and what do you trust online? Reuters just released their 2025 digital news survey. They surveyed 100,000 people in 48 countries, so it's an incredibly representative sample. And here are some of their findings. One of the ones that really struck me, which is, something that I think I too am starting to wonder about. 58% of respondents are worried about their ability to tell real news from fake news online. And that number is actually at 73% here in the United States and in Africa. The lowest percentages were in Western Europe at 46%. So that's still almost half of people who just don't know what's true or not. And that is not a good thing, I think, in the modern world. Next, news avoidance is another topic that I think also speaks to where we are as a society right now globally. We've reached record highs of news avoidance in many countries. That includes Bulgaria, Turkey, and Greece. The lowest level, so meaning people aren't trying to avoid the news, is in the Nordics, Taiwan, and Japan. That's also really interesting if you think about that across cultures and economies. Video has very clearly become the dominant medium for news consumption. Social video consumption has actually risen globally from 52% in 2020, so that was during COVID, to 65% this year. Video news consumption has jumped from 67% to 75% overall. Another area of focus in this had to do with young people. And one of the things that I think is so sad, but hopefully it's a harbinger of opportunities for news organizations too, is that young people around the world feel overwhelmed and alienated when it comes to the news. At the same time, news podcasts continue to gain popularity, particularly in the US, especially when it comes to understanding topics with depth and context. But monetization is still a challenge in many areas. Finally, referral traffic from Facebook has collapsed, and same from the former Twitter. We've talked about this in last week's episode too, that this demise is likely to be exacerbated by changes that Google has just made to roll out its AI mode feature. And another sad data point is that in the United States, since 2005, so it's 20 years ago, more than 3,000 local papers have closed. And I think it really speaks to one of the findings in the report, which is that the dearth of local news is something that's really being missed in a lot of communities, particularly here in the States. So as we look back at all of this, young Americans are turning to AI chatbots for news discovery. And that's also raising concerns about accuracy, about transparency, about trust. Most consumers still, at the end of the day, especially young people, really do prefer to have human judgment. The finding in this report is that young people in particular were not comfortable with AI-only news. And I think that's actually a good thing. It seemed like people wanted to see some efficiency and some of the positive attributes of AI, but they were unwilling to just trust everything to the robots. And I think that is a really good thing for all of us to stay connected to human information and to use technical improvements and optimizations when they make sense. So where does this leave us? So maybe the news organizations are going to take heart in looking at this. And maybe what we're going to see is some kind of modern Nellie Bly strategy. She's the famous inspiration for Jules Verne around the world in 80 Days. She was a pioneering journalist and a personality in her time. And so I wonder, as this data indicates, so many people are turning to newsfluencers and to personalities, if we might see something similar from current and more traditional news sources, rather than just relying on the brands of the institution themselves. As always, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you here soon. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, leave us a review, subscribe to the show, or check out another episode. We appreciate your support.